Hello, good evening, and welcome to CT Pages. My name is Kim Poe. I am the Children and Young Adult Consultant with the Connecticut State Library, and we are here with Sarah Morgan, who's going to tell us a bit about a summer enrichment program they did where they partnered with Parks and Rec. I think there's some ARPA funds involved. There was like a whole crew of people who made this possible. So Sarah, take it over. We're looking forward to hearing how this all went.
Thank you so much, Kim. As Kim mentioned, I'm the library director at the East Hartford Public Library, and I'm here to talk about our collaborative summer camp program that we ran this year, 2021, with ARPA funding support. So, who were the players? We had funding support from the Board of Education, we had participation from the Youth Services Department, Parks and Recreation, and the library. And that Board of Ed involvement was really key because the Board of Ed had money to pay for buses. So the Board of Ed paid for the buses. We had a grant from Accelerate CT, which is a Connecticut State Department of Education ARPA grant program that our Parks and Rec department applied for to fund the library programming. And I mentioned these ARPA specific funding opportunities to kick off my conversation, my discussion of our program, because summer enrichment is an ARPA priority category. And I really encourage you to talk with your school districts. School districts are required to spend a percentage of their ARPA funding on summer enrichment programming, and that can include supporting programs happening at libraries, and also to your municipalities, and to keep an eye out for these grant opportunities at the state and local level that might be able to support your program. So I'm here to talk about our program and the players and how we rolled it out, really to encourage other libraries to follow our model, because we found it to be such a rewarding and positive experience for the library and for kids in East Hartford. So here are the logistics. We ran the program for 7 weeks. There were about 350-ish kids. It varied week to week. And the ages ranged from 4.5, from entering kindergarten, through 15, most of the students. And then there was a small special needs camp that ran through age 21. So most of the kids were between age 6 and 12, but we did have some younger and some older. And we worked with 5 different programs at 4 different park sites. So for us, that's like the regular Parks and Rec setup. And what we provided is 2 indoor enrichment locations. We bused kids using those Board of Ed funded buses from the parks to the library, and we used 2 different classroom spaces. One we kind of improvised in one of our meeting rooms at the library. And we also bused kids to our community cultural center, which is a building owned by the town that's a former school that has a dance studio, an auditorium, a large carpeted gym space, and classrooms. So that the addition of the community cultural center meant that we were able to offer a wider variety of programming, because we had both locations as options for our enrichment. And each camper attended enrichment at least once a week. Some of our camps, like the teen camp, we were able to make sure those kids had enrichment twice a week, but every camper had it at least once a week. And as part of this program, we also funded an embedded social worker at each camp location. So we had the kids coming to us for enrichment, and then we had a social worker that was placed in each camp location. So I'm going to bring up now, one moment. I have some pictures of our adventure this summer that I'd like to share to illustrate the types of enrichment that we offered, because this is the fun part. And there's a lot of flexibility in how you define enrichment. So we did lots of different things. So this is our improvised classroom on the second floor of the library that usually is set up pre-pandemic for us as study space. And we cleared all the furniture out and created a classroom space. I should have mentioned, in addition to the buses, the Board of Education also provided us with student desks, because this was our first adventure with summer enrichment programming, and we had thought, oh, we have lots of tables and chairs, and then we realized, oh my gosh, we cannot house all these kids with our 6-foot tables and chairs socially distanced. So we borrowed 40 student desks that we put into the library from the high school. So you can see that these students are with one of our Makerspace staff members, Katie Jackson, working on a Tinkercad project in our improvised second floor classroom. So our Makerspace staff were a huge part of this venture, and we hired a temporary Makerspace staff person with the funding to supplement our existing small part-time Makerspace team. So they offered a wide variety of programming, including, as I mentioned, Tinkercad, which you can see here. And we also had lots of fun with green screens. So we did green screens in the Makerspace for all ages. And you can see this little one is looking joyful as she jumps onto the green screen. And the way our Makerspace team set it up, we had several green screens and teams of students working at each one. So we had the live on-air talent, which you can see here, and then behind the scenes, teams of kids working to edit video and photography on the green screen. So we had a wide variety of Makerspace activities for all ages located at the library. Here's Legos in our downstairs classroom. We did a little bit of Lego robotics also. And snap circuits. So this is a team working with snap circuits. And you can see sprinkled throughout the space, teenagers in purple t-shirts. Those are the Parks and Rec staff, and they helped to support the programming. They didn't present the programming, that was library staff and hired presenters, but they were in the room to assist us with classroom management, take kids to the bathroom, some of those other logistics. And we have a member of our staff is a professional puppeteer. So Roland Dupre ran puppet workshops for the different groups, including this is the special needs Sunburst camp, made puppets and acted out plays with those puppets for some of our arts programming. So that's an example. We did have arts and crafts with a focus on puppetry as part of the enrichment. And then this is a photo of Dennis Cotton, who is a fabulous drumming instructor who worked, he's someone who's worked with our youth services department, who really has a focus on drumming programs for mindfulness and mental health. So he worked once a week with the teen camp, which you can see pictured here, and visited the other camps in the park sites as well. We were also able to hire a few performers for outdoor performances on the riverfront in East Hartford. We took advantage of any space in town that would have us to try to find places that were safe for campers and that would facilitate the widest range of programming. So this is the Carnival Trio leading a conga line at an outdoor performance highlighting the culture of the Caribbean. And so here is my contact information, which actually I'll make sure I flash at the end too. Let me stop my share, as well as contact information for other members of our library staff. Kathy Potter, our head of children's and teen services, and Rebecca Leveish, who's our Makerspace supervisor, played key roles in creating the content for our collaboration. So I focused in those photos on programming that the library directly presented, the arts and crafts, the Makerspace, some of the performers that we facilitated, but we were also fortunate with the grant funding from the Connecticut Department of Education. We had a contract with the Connecticut Science Center for the whole summer, and they presented for 4 cohorts per week at our cultural center location. So kids had access to kids ages 6 through 12. The 2 largest camps also had programming from the Connecticut Science Center. So not pictured in the photos, but really critical to our enrichment programming was a summer reading program tie-in. So with the grant funding, we hired a summer reading outreach coordinator, which is something we'd always wanted to do, have more of a focus on outreach to existing summer programs, but haven't had the staffing to do. So our outreach coordinator, Jessica, registered all of the Parks and Rec campers for our summer reading program and visited them at the campsites, dropped in on them when they were visiting the library to promote reading, to promote participation in the program, and to hand out prizes at registration and completion of the program. So who did what? So Parks and Rec coordinated the buses, and the library coordinated and presented the enrichment programming, and our youth services department trained and supervised the social workers. And because this is the first time we had tried a collaboration like this, we were doing things really on the fly. So we planned our enrichment just a week or two in advance, especially because this year the Parks and Rec department weren't sure what registration was going to look like. And they take registration on a week-by-week basis. So we often had to flex how many programs we were offering at a time based on the enrollment of students to make sure that our numbers stayed down. So really, the program required very tight collaboration and regular communication to talk about numbers and logistics, and to make sure we had the right groups paired up with programming that would be a good fit for them. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, and I should have at the beginning, that this collaboration was really the brainchild of our mayor, who wanted to, held as a priority of her administration, providing a top quality summer program for children in East Hartford to ensure that kids were ready to return to school in person and also had fun. So we really took that idea and ran with it, but it was initiated by our city, which meant there was strong institutional support, especially when we hit bumps in the road. We worked through them to make the project happen. But it was so much fun for library staff. The Parks and Rec staff loved it because it really takes the pressure off camp counselors if there are structured activities presented by someone else. So it kept the kids engaged. The counselors were pleased. The kids had something else to do. And it really just was a win-win-win-win-win-win-win. So we're very excited and plan to repeat the program next year. We hope to tap in again to funds available through the Board of Education, although that request is pending. And there's been a commitment from the town to fund this as part of the operating budget if there isn't grant funding available. So that is a summary of our fun summer.
I am flabbergasted. I had no idea what you were going to say sort of from the write-up, but this is insane. This sounds amazing. So I was hoping you could give me a little bit of background. So there are many Hartfords. There's Hartford, there's East Hartford, there's West Hartford. What is East Hartford like? So what is sort of the demographic makeup? I'm trying to remember and I can't remember. And then what about your library? Like, are you a huge staff? I know a lot of times when people hear about things like this, they might think, oh, well, they're a Hartford. They must have 50 people, just in reference.
Yep, these are great questions. So East Hartford, this is my favorite Census 2020 fact. East Hartford is the second most diverse town in the state of Connecticut. So the census measures something called the diversity index, and that's if you grab two people on the street, how likely is it that they're of two different races and ethnicities? In East Hartford, we are second highest, second only to New Haven. So we are a very diverse community with people from all over the world and rich immigrant demographics, as well as people who have been here longer. So we have a very diverse community. We have a scrappy, small staff to serve our diverse community of 51,000. So we have 13 full-time staff members, but that includes our custodial and administrative staff and part-timers. So we really ran this on a shoestring and with limited staffing, and used the grant funds to supplement our staffing. So I should have mentioned, I mentioned the permanent staff, myself, Rebecca from our makerspace, who is part-time, and Kathy Potter, who's full-time, but we also hired temporary part-time grant-funded site supervisors. So we had summer staff hired to manage each classroom location. So we had one assigned to the upstairs space at the library, one assigned to the downstairs space, and then two over at the cultural center, who did things like greet the buses, escort the children into the space, get the presenter set up and ready to go, assist the presenter with whatever they needed, was responsible to troubleshoot any glitches that happened, because they did, the wrong bus goes to the wrong place, the bus is late, the bus is early, and provide some classroom management and support for the counselors. So we had those temporary site supervisors. And then we also made use of skills of anyone on our staff. So I referenced one of our adult librarians who's a puppeteer. She's not generally presenting children's programs as part of her job. I issued a call and said, if you do something, if you have a talent, if you have a skill that could be part of our summer enrichment lineup and you're willing to do a program, let me know. And we had participation from a wide range of staff across departments. And we also had some funding for extra makerspace staffing, as I mentioned. So it really was a slim group from our regular staff, supplemented with people hired just to run the camp stuff.
That's awesome. You mentioned and you spoke a little bit about involving social workers in this. Is that right? So what was sort of your reasoning behind doing that? We, especially with the pandemic, we have been hearing more and more about social and emotional learning. We've had some presenters on behalf of DLD who are social workers that are permanently stationed in libraries. We're beginning to see a little bit more of that. So what made you decide to add social workers to your team instead of just site supervisors and staff from Parks and Rec?
So mental health is a big ARPA funding priority also. So it was an eligible expense through the grant funding we received, and really a priority for us because we knew that the kids showing up at camp would really have a lot, they would be struggling with a lot. And so what we saw, and I just realized I must have skipped the pictures of our tiniest friends. We saw in particular our youngest campers really struggling with social and emotional stuff. And they had the hardest time. I'll find the pictures because they're cute, but they had the hardest time with the group learning environment. So we had actually planned for the youngest campers entering kindergarten through entering second grade to participate in a rotation of our enrichment activities. And I'm a former children's librarian. We were a little slow in getting things organized. So I covered the first week of a group of entering kindergartners. And I've been doing this a long time, and we realized they ate me alive. We realized that our smallest friends were not ready for makerspace activities. So we pivoted. We hired 2 other children's librarians part-time on contract to do school readiness programming. And with those little ones, we did story time and school readiness stuff with the support and advice from the social worker, because we realized that's what they really needed. So the social workers were at each camp location and traveled with the kids, and they were able to provide, really they were there for the kids, but they were also able to coach and support those counselors, many of whom are high school students, right, without a lot of experience working with young people, and how to best support the campers. And so actually that's something next year we hope to have more hours for the social workers. They were there on a part-time basis, and we're hoping we can have them on a full-time basis.
I love that. You, as children and young adult consultant here, I'm very immersed in that right now. And all of my public library experience was within youth services. So I absolutely understand. And I'm glad that the people who sort of built the criteria for ARPA funding thought about that. And I'm glad that you leaned into it when you saw that it was there, because our kids, especially, you're right, our youngest ones who've been living way too much of their short lives in sort of this,
so
stuff.
I had a room full of 25, and I think this is very typical, 25 kids entering kindergarten, and none of them had been in any kind of organized childcare environment before. So
Yeah.
it was challenging. I'm going to just show a picture of my cute friends since I skipped it. Of the babies. Oh, and this is shout out to the Middletown Library Service Center. We borrowed multiples from the service center that we used because our littlest friends were with us for 90 minutes, which was too long for a structured program. And we provided time for the counselors to read with them in groups and for them to browse books on their own. And you can see they're very excited about vegetables. They're sitting this group with their counselors, and they really had a great time. So we took advantage of every free resource we could find. So we borrowed kits, we borrowed tons of stuff.
Were those our snap circuits? Because when I saw them, I was like, oh, I've got those.
I think they're ours purchased with a grant, although Kathy will correct me if I'm wrong. But yes, if your library does not have snap circuits, that's something you could totally borrow from the service center to supplement what you have in your building.
That's great. Could you just tell us a little bit about the grant process? I have spoken to others and can imagine that the idea of applying for a grant can be terrifying. Now, if I remember correctly, I think you said that the Parks and Rec applied for some things, you know, the city jumped in and helped out, but on a scale of 1 to 10, like how terrifying was that process? But you're a director. I mean, maybe you do this a lot, but you know, I don't know.
Well, I will say, so the local ARPA funds, your town will have already had to allocate those. So by now, so you can find out if there's any wiggle room to allocate for summer enrichment. I think that's still an open question, but your Board of Ed, your school district is the place to start because that's an easy ask and there is no paperwork for the library at all. The school district has that money in their allocation that they're required to spend for summer enrichment, and they may have budgeted out already, depending on where you live, for other programs, but it really is worth asking because they may still be looking for ways to spend what they're required to spend on summer enrichment. And if you can feed them a request that is easy to fulfill, I think that's the easiest ask. I'm not sure whether the Department of Education they haven't announced if they're going to be offering the Accelerate CT program next year as well. I did write that grant. Parks and Rec was the official applicant, but the money was going to the library to fund our programming. So I wrote the grant and I did not find it to be an onerous process. It's certainly easier, say, than the LSTA grant process. So on a scale of like, you know, just asking, which is the Board of Ed, and LSTA, which has a lot of hoops to jump through, this was somewhere in the middle. And I will again provide my contact information. I'd be happy to support libraries in writing those grants if they're available again.
I love this. I love this. I get it. Not, you know, there's different grants require different amounts of information, but sometimes it's nice just to sort of have the curtain pulled aside. I think for some folks who have never applied for a grant, it just seems like this onerous process. And, you know, sometimes it's pushed aside before, you know, a person has really looked into it. So you did this whole camp thing, and I think I want to ask, was this an extension of like your local summer camps, so families could sign their youth up for the local summer camp that happens at XYZ Elementary every day, and then some of the activities, I think I remember I went to day camp once and we went to the beach a couple times, so sort of one of their activities throughout sort of their week was visiting the library, but then you still had to library. You still had to check books out and provide readers advisory and answer the phones and help people with the copiers. How did the two of those things happen at the same time?
That is an excellent question. We were super worried about this, especially since for us, we hadn't offered any indoor in-person programming since the pandemic began. So it was even just like welcoming people for programs in the building, like how's that going to go? And campers is a whole nother thing. So we did lots of prep to ensure that we could run the library and run the camp programming at the same time. So we established a very scripted traffic flow for the kids. Like the bus went to X store, the kids walked up Y stairway, they used Z bathrooms, and also an assignment of responsibility so that at all times our public service staff knew who to call for what and when in response to inevitable challenges. Like, we were very worried about kids wandering away. I'm happy to say, knock on my desk, that it didn't happen. But we talked through some of those pitfalls, like what do we do if? So we had lots of conversation, people planning for the camp, our team working on that project with our public service staff to make sure channels of communication were open and everybody knew who was going to be where, when, doing what, and who was in charge. We also gave our site supervisors walkie-talkies, which helped to make sure that we had good communication within the building and people working at the camp.
That's awesome. And I guess the last thing that I would ask you, you've mentioned this a little bit sort of throughout, your talk, that you hope to have more hours for the supervisor or for the social workers next year, that this is something that you do hope to do again next year. The funding structures might look a little differently depending on Department of Ed and all of that. But, so let's say, for sure you're going to do this for summer of 2022. Is there anything that you would change or adjust, or even something where you're like, that was perfect, check, keeping it forever?
Our makerspace programming was probably the most exciting part of this for our staff, because we usually work with small groups and it was just a chance for them to scale up some of these awesome programs to reach a new audience. So that was like, we're going to do more and the same of that. Really, where we see the greatest opportunity for improving our program is better training for the counselors. So especially if we have access to grant funding that would allow us to pay them for a week of training, we're going to strive for that, and to have library staff involved with our Parks and Rec department in training counselors and how to support enrichment activities, how to be role models. I'll share, there was very funny, the first day the Science Center was at the Cultural Center, they were doing an auditorium style show. And so the kids were in the auditorium and all the counselors sat in the back row and put their feet up to enjoy the Science Center. We're like, no, you guys are in charge of the kids while they're here. But they, they're young too, and these are mostly teenagers, right? And they were like really into the programming, but sort of helping them be leaders and kind of take on that responsibility of being a role model, I think is something we can help with. Also more and better parent communication around summer reading participation, because although we got a lot of exposure for our summer reading program through this partnership, we didn't get a lot of kids participating outside the camp day. And that's something we really hope to focus on next year. But this really was a team effort. Everybody, regardless, as I mentioned, our public services staff, even if they weren't helping the camp, like this was our institutional directly, they had a role here, and this was our institutional priority this summer, and it absolutely paid off. It was a terrific experience for us.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for your time. I mean, at this point, you're kind of like the poster child for community engagement and outreach right now. And thank you for sharing an amazing program.
I think it's really important for libraries to look at these funding sources that are available. And that's what I'm really passionate about. And I'd be happy to talk to other directors to take library programming into new directions.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We appreciate your time.